So this is our second ever episode, and it's also the second part of our discussion about Layne Fargo's The Favourites. In this part, we're going to go full spoilers, so if you've not already picked up the book, then please go do that. Come back, join us. But also go check out the first episode where we told you more about the summary and we just discussed some kind of general themes. We talked about ice dancing. We talked about my unhealthy Wuthering Heights childhood obsession and your obsession with gossip. This week, we're going to focus in a little bit deeper on the book because we can now talk about some topics that beforehand would maybe have gave away plot points, and we didn't want to do that. One of the first things when we were discussing this book, when we were talking about how we were going to introduce it, we were talking about what genre it was, and Susan said, "Oh, well, it's a contemporary coming of age," and I immediately turned around and went, "Yeah, of course it is, yeah." My main thought was, is it a romance? Is it a thriller? And then I kind of looked back round in my head and went, is it a contemporary? Because it's technically, I think, by very technical standards, I think this is a historical, which makes me feel absolutely ancient.
So I am going to put my case forward for it being contemporary.
Okay.
Yes, whilst some of the events that happened in the story happened in the past. I cannot call it history. I can't call it historical.
Yeah. See,
however, the story is told from today's perspective through the documentary.
Okay, see, my counterpoint would be that the meat of the story, the plot, is happening in the past. See, like, if we compared last time we were talking about Evelyn Hugo, that is being told by a current day journalist. You cannot say that Evelyn Hugo isn't a historical novel.
Some of it's historical and some of it's
So I would say that this, whether the 90s/early noughties is historical or not, because that's the real thing, is the 90s or the noughties, whatever you want to call that kind of gossipy, journalisty time period we're in. That's the thing that I think would be classed as historical, because I think technically it's more than 30 years is what puts it as a historical, and that comes well into there.
However, parts of the story were less than that.
Yeah.
Some of it was from 2013. That's not historical.
It's a genre-defying blend, shall we say.
I guess the mixed media approach does actually blur the lines a bit, because the documentary is currently
much more
made.
current day than...
So looking at some of the recent documentaries that have been out on Netflix, for example, there's been one about Amy Bradley's disappearance. The documentary itself is not historical.
No.
However, happenings in it would be classed as...
Yeah, it is interesting. And I think, it's a good plot point or not plot point, but kind of aspect to start the conversation on.
It's a good argument for us to start off.
Yeah, it is. Because that thing where it's kind of ambiguously, is it contemporary, is it historical? I feel there's quite a lot of those kind of ambiguous moments in terms of the book in quite a lot of its genres and themes. Because, for instance, it comes back to, as I was saying, the Wuthering Heights angle for me personally. It's got a romance. The romance is absolutely central to it. You cannot say this book is not a romance. But I'd also say it's not a capital R genre romance. It's a book with a romantic story in it, which is very much what Wuthering Heights is. It's a book that has a romance and is often mislabeled as capital R romance when it's not. It's a love story. That doesn't mean it gets a happy ending.
Yeah,
and I feel it had that romance. Even then, it doesn't end up with the bow tie of like a lot of romance novels do, where the two of them end up happily ever after, and it ends in a kind of nicely complicated, weird found family type of way.
100%. But I do think the romance is actually sidelined by the skating partnership.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because I think that's one of the things I liked about it as well, is that the romance is there, and obviously it's absolutely crucial, and it does factor into how their skating partnership works. It factors into those kind of jealousies and the different dynamics in relationships. But I love that more so from Kat. Obviously, Heath, it seems, is completely dedicated to her, and he does all these things to make her happy. It's very clear at various points that he's there for her.
I think, just as a little aside, his kind of traumatic background suggests there's some sort of attachment issues there, which would actually make sense that his focus in life is to make sure that the person he has attached to is secure. And
Yeah,
that
I can
they
see
won't
that, I
leave him.
suppose.
But it's also not very healthy.
Yeah, I mean, well, again, Wuthering Heights, it's not a health. Nobody's healthy. That's, again, I think maybe I was pre-prepped for this to be full of really unhealthy, parasocial, complicated relationships that, although they are romance, they're not perfect and smooth. And because I knew, once I realised that it was Wuthering Heights, it gave a different context. So one of the characters that it did take me a minute to recognise is Ellis Dean, and I was very convinced that he was someone, but it didn't quite. I guess because it's a gender flipped one, it took me a minute to get the fact that this is Nellie Dean or Ellen Dean from Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights is also told similarly to this. A stranger arrives at Wuthering Heights on a dark night and he sits by the fire, and Nellie tells him the story of the family that have lived there. At this point, Heathcliff is an older, he's got they've got grown kids. As we talked about, it goes through into the second generation. So Nellie Dean is telling the story in that where it was kind of their past. She's going back 30 years or whatever.
And into historical fiction.
Yeah, into historical fiction, even in that. So the Ellis Dean character, it took me a minute to clock who he is. But once I got that, it was so perfect because, of course, he's the person telling the story, which makes sense then that he's a gossip columnist and he's telling their story. And in Wuthering Heights, you never question just because it's not part of the book, but it's one of those ones where you forget that you're technically only getting Nellie's point of view on events. I think you forget that if Heathcliff was telling his story or if Kathy was telling the story, you might get something different. We get Nellie's perception of them, but it's presented as almost a third person. This is the honest truth. And I think this was really interesting because in the interviews we see Ellis kind of slightly spinning things and you see people contradicting him and how he'll kind of say like his gossip blog was absolutely justified and he's done nothing wrong and he presented things exactly as he saw it. And then you get people saying, well, no, did you? And I think that's a really nice way of updating that, and it adds a bit more, it modernises it a bit in that we now would probably scrutinise someone's account of history a little bit more closely than the characters in Wuthering Heights do.
So, as I've mentioned once or twice, I've not read Wuthering Heights, so I don't know any of the characters, but I did absolutely adore the character of Ellis Dean, all the way from kind of his competitive days to, the party with the white feathered coat that got ruined. And I think he was just so symbolic of that time and how celebrity culture kind of blew up with gossip blogs and gossip websites and forums and message boards. Something that I really wish the author would do is actually publish his gossip site.
That would have been fun. You could have had little bits in the book. Again, coming back to, I think we talked about in the last episode, the Janice Hallett's really, really mixed media. You could have had little, maybe not Instagram posts. I was
Like
going to say
vignettes.
you could have had little snippets, or you could have had little kind of like fake paparazzi. We talk about, you could have little sidelines, little newspaper cuttings.
Yeah. To be fair, I want the website. Like, it should be created and then preserved as history, because at that time, that was something I would be on the gossip websites. I was working in an office at the time, and you really weren't meant to use a computer for anything other than your work. And it was before smartphones were really a huge thing. I'm thinking like kind of mid to late 2000s. So you would kind of sneak on during your lunch break. You wait till everybody else was out the office so you could have a look, or you would have to wait till you got home. And you didn't. I mean, I did have a computer at home, but not everybody did. So I think that time there was just so much gossip and paparazzi photos of across the spectrum of celebrity.
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on it last time when we talked about footballers.
Yes.
And kind of the different time period, which again ties into is this historical or not. And whether it is or not, I think you can definitely see a change in the times.
Yes.
Because I feel like the power almost that gossip columnists had and have in this kind of story is so different from now, because partly I guess with smartphones, and it used to be that to be a celebrity gossip columnist, you would obviously have to have, for instance, you'd have to have a website. And it was much less common then for people. You can just set up a WordPress blog in 10 minutes the way people do now. There was almost a kind of power aspect to that. You had a lot more influence, whereas now people can see Tom Holland in the street filming Spider-Man and snap photos for Instagram. They can record a video of him onto TikTok when they see him out shopping. That kind of wasn't as easy to do. Everyone is a celebrity columnist now in a lot of ways. That is really interesting how that changed. And even when you were saying about there being, you could have the website, you could have mixed media in the book, my immediate thought was, oh, you could have little fake Instagram posts with like the tags and stuff in the bottom and have little kind of like jokey reference. But you couldn't because Instagram wasn't a thing then.
Because it's a historical novel.
Yeah,
apparently.
But you know what I mean? Like, yeah, so the gossip, like you saying about gossip columnists, I think it's hard, or not hard, but it's strange maybe to look back now, and people younger than us obviously maybe it's difficult to kind of understand the kind of influence that celebrity gossip columnists had.
Yeah,
in comparison now to just like you follow that celebrity on Instagram and you hear it from them.
Yeah, and I think we talked about it last episode about celebrities having more control over their image. But I would say in this book, Ellis Dean is an insider already in the world, so he already has that access. And a lot of the gossip columnists of the time had that access, or they had the contacts. I'm just thinking back to some of the horrendous blogs and websites that I read. Even the TV ones, they had insiders on set feeding them specifically the little tidbits of gossip. So the gossip was very controlled, but not by the celebrities, by the people around them who were kind of making money off it.
I obviously wasn't really into celebrity gossip columns the way you are, but the one that kind of like the if you had to pick, you know, one person that it stands out to me, so I think would be then probably the most famous, would obviously be like the Perez Hilton's blog. And I definitely thought there was some of that coming through in Ellis Dean as a character.
Yes, I would agree. For those of you who are slightly younger and only know Perez Hilton from his current campaign where he's being taken to court by Blake Lively as part of that whole thing, he used to be very, very nasty. He would publish upskirt photos. He would publish photos of celebrities who were on private beaches, maybe in swimming costumes or topless, that were taken through the really long lens. But then he would also annotate the photographs, and, you know, he would make a picture of a female celebrity out doing her shopping with a paint tool kind of thing. He would draw on penises and things to make it look like they were involved in some sort of sexual
I think it's really interesting
engagement.
to see how that's kind of changed. Like, I'm not saying it's better now, God knows, but like, it's different. Like you're talking about, like taking pictures of celebs on the beach and publishing them, and the upskirt photos. You just wouldn't get away with that now. Like, I think as well, it's not really related, but a while back I saw people, they were doing, you know, in the noughties and how that affected like body image nowadays in a certain age group of women. And they were like, do you remember when we were told that Britney Spears was fat? Or
Yes.
that in this image where she's clearly a size 8, they would highlight the tiniest little bump and they're like, yes, that is her hip bones. Whereas now we've kind of moved away from it a little bit. We're coming back around.
Yeah, I think we are coming back around. But I remember that performance. I want to say like 2005, she had a baby months before her second child in the space of 2 years, I think it was. And looking back, like, what a nightmare. It was horrendous, and she was so fat. And at the time, I was kind of like, I don't think she's that fat. And looking at it now, it's like, she's a slim woman who looks amazing. Not amazing for being postpartum. She just looks amazing.
I think there was a lot of that with female celebrities, because even things like I remember, like
Jessica Simpson.
yeah, that she was the fat singer.
She was.
There was always like, oh, she's got a really good voice, and because obviously women have to be in competition, they all had to have their little niche. Britney Spears was the very Disney pop princess when she first came out. Christina Aguilera was like more raunchy rival to that. They painted her as, and Jessica Simpson was painted as the fat one.
Yes.
And when you look back again, you go, she's a perfectly average, lower than average size.
I think she was a size UK 8.
Like, there's no... But at the time, gossip rags got away with posting pictures of them, highlighting bits.
And also from angles that would be unflattering.
Yeah.
But you know, I remember, I'm probably thinking of the same concert that she did, and she had the jeans on, sort of the high-waisted jeans, that maybe weren't the most flattering when photos were taken from ground level and she was on the stage. But actually, it's like, that's her internal organs.
But
you need to have somewhere to put them.
But yeah, I just think it's interesting to see how, because obviously this then is pulling that era back into like focus when time has passed and it's faded a little bit in like our memories. It's interesting to see how gossip and celebrity columnists and think that kind of journalism, if you want to call it journalism, has changed over time. Without, I wouldn't say there was a big event that I really noticed, but when you compare what he's getting away with and what he's doing to now, you kind of do go, oh, actually there has been a shift.
Yeah, and I do think it's the social media and people being able to kind of restrict access. They don't rely on the paparazzi anymore to take a picture of them and their family having a picnic.
Yes.
They just get the nanny to take the pictures.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So it is very much, they are more in control to an extent. And also, I think regulations have been tightened up. You know, you're talking about upskirt photos. They are now not allowed in the UK. I don't know about the US, but in the UK, that is now a crime. You would find yourself on a specific register if you did that. For me, there was a specific moment in the book where I just had a bit of a light bulb moment for this, and that was when Kat realised that Sheila Lynn was calling the paparazzi on her. And that is what happens. It still happens, but it used to happen a lot more. And it is that, where is the responsibility there? Because you think, at the time, Kat, barely an adult, Sheila's a coach in a position of power, and also, you know, double work Olympian, whatever else. But she's phoning the paparazzi to follow Kat and Heath about so that her children get an advantage. And I just think that sums up this. We talked briefly in the previous episode about ambition and about the drive that people have. And obviously Sheila Lynn had been an Olympian, had children, come back, won again, and has now channeled all that into her children and into her children's career. And I just think that is fascinating, because that's the type of thing that actually did happen.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting about how much of it makes you question how much of the lives they're living are manufactured and how much are kind of their genuine lives that they would be living without this outside influence. And I think it's interesting to see in that kind of context you have Kat and Heath, who are by far they're the up and comers. They've not come from this kind of dynasty. They're much less polished. And if you kind of compare them then to the Lynn siblings, who obviously are coming from, they have grew up in this world, their lives have from a certain angle, I felt their lives felt a little bit more shallow, a little bit more hollow, that it's all about this kind of the image that's projected to the world rather than about whether they're happy about what's happening with them. Whereas Kat and Heath, it seemed more that it kind of came from an internal thing rather than a gloss that's put on them.
Yes, I think I agree with that. For me, it was really clear that Kat had this driving ambition to win the gold, and Heath, his ambition was to make Kat happy, to do whatever she wanted.
Yeah, kind of an equally driving ambition.
Yes.
That is coming from him. It's just not the way we are trained to think of ambition.
Whereas with the Lynn twins, I don't know how much of this is just what we're expected to do with our lives. And actually, if we were to stop and think about it, we hate every single thing about what we're doing, but our mum has never given us that opportunity.
Yeah, I think Garrett, you definitely see that thing of, especially by the end, you're seeing that none of this has been about him. He's never probably analysed it too closely, but he's also never really wanted it. I think Bella is a more complex character in that sense, where it's much harder to tell where the line of what she genuinely wants and what she's been told she wants, it's harder to find that line in her. Of the two, she's a little bit more nuanced. Her ambition, she's just as ambitious as Kat, but I think it's quite hard to tell how much of that is something she would have wanted without her mum's influence and how much is almost conditioning.
100%. And if her mum had been a swimmer, would she have been focused on swimming the same way? Whereas for Kat,
This has been it.
yeah. And it was actually still Sheila Lynn who inspired her.
Yeah.
So
It has a nice, almost kind of like Shakespearean tragedy thing to that, where like Kat is inspired by Sheila Lynn. She's the hero. She goes to the kind of the training school because of that, and ultimately it's then partly Sheila that in a lot of ways is responsible for the tragic turns that the story takes, and it has an element of kind of inevitability to it right from the start that she's there.
yes, and I think it is that never meet your heroes because they're all human. And that definitely played out, you know, when, as I say, in that moment when Kat realised that Sheila was calling the paparazzi to distract her, that
she had been using them, or she'd been kind of keeping them in her back pocket in a lot of ways. They weren't even something where she'd been like, this is what I'm going to use them for. It was almost that they were kind of disposable, which again, she's seeing them, they're the kind of they're the lower social class. They're not part of these dynasties. They probably are in a lot of ways seen by her as disposable. She'll keep them around in case they're useful, but she's not really bothered by them until they really start to compete with her kids.
Do you know, it's funny because I have a slightly different take on that, because at some point throughout the book, it was kind of revealed that Sheila Lynn's real name was Maylie Lynn.
Yes.
And her parents were not wealthy. I think they owned a shop maybe, but not like a chain of shops, just like a shop. So she was certainly like, you know, working class, maybe lower middle class, an absolute push, which in elite sports that cost a lot of money, you know, that's a fight yourself.
Yeah,
fight your way up.
Again, I think Layne Fargo does a great job of creating these characters that are really, really complicated. They have nuance to their... Because obviously you have Sheila as she is when we see her. She has the power. She is definitely the one that is in the position of power. She has the money, the drive, all that. But she's not just painted as that's the way she came into being. You have the idea that she would have had to fight to get there, and then almost is kind of becoming what probably the people that would have been against her if you went another 10, 15 years back. And I think she does a great job of giving these characters that nuance without really spending a lot of time on them. Sheila Lynn I wouldn't have said she was one of the main characters in the book. And yet, if you think about just that, there's layers of complexity there.
It's like her influence is the reason for the entire book.
Yeah, without her actually being a major player. I think she does a really good job of making these characters feel really nuanced and really complex and like fleshed out people.
Do you know what is actually interesting though? We're talking about this and I'm thinking, Kat, when she was younger, had that parasocial relationship with Sheila Lynn, and then obviously
we see the kind of, I guess, the way at first in general, Kat is kind of, you know, Kat and I guess Heath to an extent are held up. They are, you know, they're given all these kind of, you know, everyone loves them, and how that gradually turns against them up to then you get obviously the end, which we're allowed to do spoilers now, where that kind of someone that has looked up to Kat as a hero is ultimately the kind of the reason for her downfall. In a lot of ways, it's like we talked about, I think briefly again in the last episode where we talked about the idea of the wags and the younger women coming up and fighting, potentially kind of pulling down the current reigning kind of lead champion, or if you want to call it that. And we said that's quite like, say, Game of Thrones with the queens, or it's quite like these kind of Hollywood golden age actresses where they're always, you only get so much time. And so you kind of are always looking out for the person that's coming up after you, and vice versa. You're always trying to get to the top. And I think it's interesting if you see Kat, she's been on both ends of it, because you see the cycle is happening again and again.
Yeah, it's quite a toxic cycle, isn't it? But it's that she saw Sheila Lynn do everything to get to the top, which she then copied. And then was it Francesca?
Is again playing out the same
to quite an extreme level. Like,
yeah,
you know,
she in a way you have to respect. She went for it. Like she was like,
she committed a crime.
she was dedicated.
Yes,
she went, I'm going full in on this. Although interestingly, again, it's kind of ambiguous. We said a lot of things in this book are ambiguous, but towards the end, that whereas that cycle is repeated and repeated and repeated, because of the angle she takes on it, and because we get to see, I think maybe Ellis as well, it definitely comes through, and whoever's doing the interview for the transcripts, it doesn't seem that the cycle kind of quite continues, because I don't think her career goes the way she wanted it to, because there's always that suspicion. So she says that she's been tarred. There was never anything proved, and her career has been kind of like tarred by this brush, where she did nothing wrong. Like she's very like that's what the moment in that kind of interview where she you see her kind of unravel a bit, and it doesn't seem like she kind of got the same run as Kat did.
No, I think that was quite clear that she didn't. But also, was she as talented?
Yeah, or would she have been if she'd focused on training to the level that Kat and Heath? I mean, they were, you know,
They were dedicated.
Even before they joined the Lynns, you talked about them when they were children. The level of dedication they had when they were young children on their own on their local ice rink. If she had spent the time training the way they trained instead of coming up with these, Russian spy level plots, would she have been a better skater, or was she too hooked up in the image of it than the sport?
It takes you back to that kind of cultural thing, I guess, is she had a really privileged upbringing, as did the Lynn twins. Mm-hmm. They never quite reached that level of success. Is it that kind of grit that comes from having to face obstacles in your life? If someone's paying, we'll just throw money at that problem. We've got to have private tutors. You don't need to go to school. Then you maybe don't learn how to have.
Yeah, well, it's like you said that there's that kind of. I would say there's more of a parallel between Kat and Sheila than there is between Sheila and her own kids.
Yeah.
So like you said, that there's that kind of the drive that comes from having to start at the bottom and prove yourself again and again and again, rather than having it handed to you. And when it's not handed to you when you expect it to be, you react poorly.
Yeah, it's like that Daddy, I want a pony.
Yeah, it was. I thought it was really well done.
I do think it was well done. And I think there's a lot to talk about in this book, and we probably won't actually be able to cover everything that we want to talk about. So I'm just going to put it in here. If there's anything that you think we've missed, feel free to reach out on our social media.
We do have a couple of different channels. We have Blue Sky, I think we have TikTok. We are also setting up a Discord group, and there will be channels for each of the books. So if you want to get in there and you want to leave your thoughts or any questions you have for everyone else, do some discussion on your own, we are more than happy to take part in that as well.
Something that always fascinates me is sibling relationships. I don't know if it's because I'm a middle child and I have an older sibling and a younger sibling, and I'm also in the middle. But I found the Lynn twins fairly fascinating. What were your thoughts?
I'm a sibling too, but I'm an older sibling. There's actually, I think, 6 years between me and my brother. So we had in school, we had a slightly different relationship than a lot of my friends had with their siblings, who were maybe only a year or two either way. Because me and my brother have always, especially when we were younger, and obviously we spent more time together when we were younger, but our interests were always quite different, because me at 13 was in no way interested in what him as a 7-year-old was interested in. So we never had that really competitive angle that I think you see in other siblings, where I had cousins who were 2 years apart, and I saw them physically try to break down the doors to get each other sometimes, whereas my brother never had that, because occasionally he as a child broke my toys and I was determined we should send him back to the shop that he came from. But I don't think we had that competitive aspect. At worst, we maybe just weren't interested in each other for vast kind of, until he hit, I don't know, about maybe like 17, 18, and I was in my 20s, and I went, oh, he's a human being that can have actual conversations now. I'm slightly more interested in him as a person. But we didn't have that competitive for kind of like competition for parental attention that I think siblings that are closer tend to have.
That does make sense. My sibling relationships were very different.
But I do think, like, say, it served us well as adults. I know, like, we get along quite well. I think it's interesting with bringing it back to Garrett and Bella, that they're specifically twins. Yes. They're not even just siblings that are close in age. They are literally twins. And I think, I mean, I don't know how real it is, because I've known a few twins in my life, but like in fiction, definitely, and in media, we tend to see twins as almost this kind of mythical creature where you expect there to be this kind of like, not unnatural, but they have a different mystical almost connection that other siblings don't have, and an understanding of each other that other siblings don't have.
They're just the same age in the same classes, doing all the same activities, sharing clothes sometimes.
Yeah.
That's what the connection is.
I do think there's a little bit of a like pop culture obsession with twins. You kind of go, oh, like the creepy twins in whatever, or like the way, like, you know, again, I feel like we're talking about Game of Thrones a lot in a book that doesn't have any fantasy aspects. But again, they're not just siblings, they're twins. They came from the same, like...
And lovers.
Yeah, exactly. It's even more taboo.
Thankfully, in the favourites, the twins are not lovers. It's actually made... There's actually a part in it where they're looking for different partners because they are siblings. Yeah. They can't actually do the romantic dances.
It would be
quite
weird.
Limited. Whereas for Kat and Heath, they are like...
They're full sizzling. On going at it on the ice. But yeah, I think that the sibling thing is interesting. The way especially in books and media and stuff, we I don't know, it's not ideal. But there's something about twins that seems to fascinate everyone. Mm-hmm. That it just kind of ramps up all those, whether it's a taboo situation, it's worse and more taboo and more fascinating and salacious because they're twins rather than just siblings. And vice versa, there's like the dynamic between the twins in this. Is it more interesting because they're twins, or would it be the same as if they were siblings with a 3 or 4 year age gap? They definitely feel like they're more reliant on each other, especially when Kat and Heath first arrive and they are partners. I feel Bella and Garrett are quite dependent on each other, probably partly because they don't have a father, and Sheila she's so focused on their careers. She's weirdly overly... like monitors them. She's really, really overprotective,
tiger mother,
while at the same time being really distant. Like she manages somehow to be both these things that are completely the opposite and the worst, and she manages them both.
Yeah, she kind of is neglectful on a human level, but provides them with everything that they need.
Yeah, she's always, always, always watching them, but she also pays no attention to them whatsoever. And they, because of that, do seem like they have quite a...
Sorry for that. Somebody's moving furniture in the background.
It wasn't me, I swear.
It wasn't us.
So they do seem quite codependent on each other at that point. And it is interesting then when you throw Kat and Heath into the mix, the way that maybe shatters some of their relationship.
Do you know, it's funny for me because I know they're twins, but they don't feel like twins. It feels like Garrett is a couple of years older.
He does feel more mature. I wonder if that's because he's not as competitive as the others. He seems to have a maturity that comes with age. Whereas, like you said about them, it being almost high school drama, with that competition, the different partners moving about, Garrett's almost separate from that, partly because obviously he's gay and he's having these kind of in-the-closet type relationships. He's disconnected from the Heath, Kat, Bella triangle disaster. And he's not as, like, that teenage drive to win, our team's the best, go, whatever type of high school drama. He's just more calm because he's not as bothered. And I wonder if that makes him feel older, that he's able to see things a little bit more clearly than they are because he's not as invested in this winning at all costs.
Or he's maybe, actually, his brain has managed to develop slightly more because he's not focused on one outcome.
He, in a way, is already looking to the future because he's thinking, okay, like you said about their careers they're on a relatively tight kind of like lifetime career. He's already starting to maybe look past that and going, when the competition is over, I can actually start to live the life I want to live. Whereas the other three, I mean, Heath maybe not so much, but definitely the two girls, but when we reach that stage, our lives are over. Everything has to happen before our career is done. Whereas Garrett is taking a much longer view. His life won't really start until his career is done. Yeah. So maybe that makes him feel older as well, that he's looking forward, whereas they are seeing like time coming towards them in a really threatening way.
Yeah, makes sense. Coming back just very briefly to siblings and sibling rivalry and things, I just wanted to check, because I know you don't follow sports the way that I do.
I'm learning so much, though.
So a while ago, I'm going to say a couple of years, probably about 10 years ago, the UK has two brothers who compete in triathlons, the Brownlee brothers. Can't remember their first names. And one of them was like hotly tipped to win a world championship or a something, but actually collapsed quite near the finish line. So he was, I believe, in gold medal position. So he kind of collapsed, and one of his competitors just like toddles on by him.
I need everyone that's listening, so I obviously can't see Susan right now, to just imagine the amount of hand motions as she like finger dances her impression of these people running in this race.
think possibly a second competitor also goes past, and then his brother is in the fourth spot and actually comes to him and literally lifts him up and kind of arm round the shoulder and kind of drags him and pushes him across the line so that he comes in the bronze medal position. And it is just that, like, wow.
That's it. That's very much like a like love over ambition there, where you're kind of giving up that spot because you know it maybe means more to someone else or it's important to them. I mean, that's real self-sacrifice there.
I don't know. Can you imagine how your mum would react if you just ran past your brother who's like collapsed on the ground?
I mean, Sheila in this would probably be like, do it.
She
Flatten
would.
that man.
She would disown the child who stopped and gave up their own position. But it's just that sort of, it's really interesting.
It would be fascinating to know which of whether, because obviously even with twins, there's an older and a younger.
I think it was the older brother who helped the younger brother.
I mean, like, I know with twins that older younger dynamic is less, but there are some stereotypes that hold true.
Yeah. And I think if we were to go back to when the Lynns split up, it did feel like Kat and Garrett were better.
Yes.
But it did feel like Sheila was on Bella's side more.
Yeah, I think maybe Sheila saw a lot more of herself in Bella because obviously Bella has that more competitive aspect. Like we said about who knows how much of that competitiveness is inherent and how much has been engineered. But I definitely think Bella is a much more mini-me of Sheila than Garrett was ever going to be.
See, I read it differently. I read it as Garrett doesn't need the support because Kat's there, because Sheila saw Kat or saw herself in Kat at that kind of perseverance, win at all costs, don't need any help, will push their way through, whereas I feel she wanted Bella to be more like her and was going to give her the help she needed to achieve because she couldn't achieve it by herself.
See, I've maybe painted Sheila a little bit as more, I don't know, maybe not a meaner character, but a slightly more manipulative, darker character than you have. I see her more as that she's almost, this can sound awful. You know what animals, and they have I don't know, there's a type of bird, and they have a nest, and they will literally decide the one that is the most likely to survive, and they will chuck the rest from the nest. And you get some horrific footage of them literally yeeting them out of the nest. I kind of feel like that was her thing, and she was like, I want my legacy. One of my, like, the fact that she got twins was kind of a nice bonus. She gave her two options, but really she's like, I want my legacy, my name that I created. Like you said, it wasn't the name that she came up with. I want that to echo down through history. And she's kind of went, Garrett isn't that invested. And I feel like she almost kind of pivots to Bella because she's like, I can mold this one. Garrett is a nice backup. And Kat succeeds because she almost seems not to like Kat.
That's because she doesn't like herself.
Yeah, and also Kat is potentially bringing down Bella.
Mm-hmm.
Like she's better than her. And I think that's why I saw her focusing on Bella, because she's like, this is the one I want to succeed.
So Bella's like an extension of herself.
Yeah, exactly. Bella is the extension of her legacy. Garrett was there. He was helpful when she needed a partner for Bella. He's a nice backup. If Bella's career doesn't go out, she's got another option. But I definitely saw her, I guess, in a slightly more... I saw her in a slightly more negative light, obviously, than you did, the way I interpreted her actions.
Yeah, and I think as well, I guess it's that Garrett's already behaving in ways that she can't control. Whereas Bella's behaving in ways that she can control.
And I think the way Garrett...
could be path of least resistance. Even.
Yeah, and the way Garrett is behaving in ways outside of her control are also ways that he's already trying to keep that secret. So he's already kind of not causing waves, whereas Bella is much more loud. She's much more dramatic. She's the one that if one of them's going to make a scandal that brings down their legacy, it's more likely to be her. Whereas Garrett's already playing things quite close to the vest. And I think, as I read Sheila, everything is about legacy.
Yeah, I would agree, because even going back to the fact that she changed her own name, you know, is that she's building something new.
Yeah, and again, we're talking about that thing of that ambition over everything else is a really common theme running through the book.
It is. It's not a nice characteristic to have, though. Although, that's a debatable point. What are your thoughts on That determination to win at all costs.
I kind of love it. I love, I read more fantasy than this kind of contemporary fiction, so it's a slightly different thing. So the ambition to win at sports, maybe we would play out as like the ambition in politics and kings and queens and all that kind of stuff. And I love characters, especially female characters, because it happens more so now, but it's kind of tradition, like it's a really recent push that female characters are allowed to be not perfectly nice. They're allowed to put their own interests first. They're allowed to potentially damage other people to achieve what they want. And they're allowed to be kind of unrepentantly ambitious.
It's almost like female characters are based on real human beings.
Yeah,
and actually
almost.
It's okay
It's shocking.
for women to have ambition.
And to not constantly be putting themselves under other people's shoes for the sake of, but you shouldn't be that ambitious.
You shouldn't be difficult.
Yeah, and I think it's really, I love when you get these really, not only that they are ambitious, I love when we get especially female characters that are ambitious anyway, but you do sometimes get characters where they're ambitious but they feel bad about it. I love when you get characters that they're ambitious and they don't feel bad about it. They're like, I did what I had to do to achieve what I wanted to achieve, and I don't see why I should feel bad about it. Obviously, like, if we're going into fantasy world, there's a point where you go, they massacred a village or whatever. Maybe there I will give you things.
They took their dragon above the city that they had wanted to rule and killed every single person in it.
I'm not saying it's a one-for-one analogy, but but I love characters where they'll say, like, oh, it's a morally grey protagonist, and it turns out that they do one thing that's slightly sketchy, and then they feel tragic about it. And I'm like, no, I love it when they go, I did it, I poisoned him, and I would do it again. And I really liked in this that you had Kat with her ambition, that she was like, no, I know what my goal is, and her goal is no less than anyone else's. Why should she defer to the Lynns? Why should she defer to anyone else and let them take the win that she feels she deserves?
100%. That came through not just about her kind of ambition and achievements, but also her upbringing.
Yeah, again, we've not really touched on it, and it's probably you could have an entire spin-off topic about this, is the kind of social divisions kind of aspect of this.
Like the hierarchies.
Yeah, that they are kind of coming from a quite impoverished background, and again, they're daring to step their toe into a world where they don't belong.
How dare they?
How dare they? And again, I guess, something that we're not really qualified to talk about, but you could come at this, if you were looking at the favourites, from the angle of the Lynns, both Sheila and the twins. And again, people that traditionally maybe wouldn't have been seen as belonging, daring to step foot into a kind of established dynasty-style arena. Like, there's a lot going on in this book. There's a lot of underdogs who become overdogs, who things twist around, and about how, I guess, I ever take it, like, it feels a bit overdramatic for what it is, but you could talk about the idea that power corrupts in this one.
Yeah.
And the idea that even the ones that, wherever they start out, they gradually come round to the establishment's point of view. Yeah, as they become more part of the establishment.
Yeah, as it starts to benefit them more. Yeah. Even Ellis Dean.
Yeah.
He was a middling skater.
He's okay, but he's not on their level.
No, but he was openly out and then used that to his advantage to sneak in to find out the stories. And it doesn't say, and this is why I really wish the blog existed, because I, like Perez Hilton used to do, I suspect Ellis Dean would out people on his blog.
I definitely got there was a vicious streak to him, and a kind of glee almost in the moments where he had things he could reveal. I don't think he played fair, and it worked in their favour and against them. There were times where he probably should have reported something if he was going to be completely, neutral and treating everyone the same, where he covers for them a little bit, especially towards the end. But there are also moments where you can almost see the vindictiveness of him getting to break a story that's going to make his blog massive. And
I think as well that was really cleverly done by the author, because that was a sign of the times. Coming back to the celebrity bloggers, most, if not all, have actually reflected on what they did and the damage that they did. And I would say that was probably maybe like 10-ish years ago, so maybe like 2014, 2015, which is not too far out in this timeline. Yeah. So, the behind the scenes, people are starting to reflect because culture has changed and it's no longer okay to laugh at people who have eating disorders. So I think that, again, maybe he was just, you know, becoming an adult.
I think it's fascinating as well because it ties back into what we started. I think maybe in the first episode, the very first thing we talked about in this book, we said that the mixed media creates a kind of tension and an atmosphere that builds almost like a pressure cooker where everyone's under scrutiny and everything feels really intense. And like you're saying, that idea of that in that moment, the things he justified to himself, because almost it feels like obviously there isn't a time pressure, it's happening over however long it's happening. But as a reader, we get the feeling it's all very happening very quickly. And Ellis justifies things whereas looking back, the pressure's slightly off and he maybe can judge his actions a little differently now that he's not racing from one thing to the next.
I think as well it was mentioned when they were at that final Olympics, he seemed to be in a relationship with Kirk, who's obviously a 20-year older gentleman who maybe had gone through that reflection and learning from.
Yeah, again, seeing the kind of the different stratas almost, because they're not generations, because they're all so close in age that I don't know that you could talk about them as being different generations.
You couldn't, but technically they are old enough to be parents of.
But yeah, you definitely see the kind of the cycles, like we said about the cycle of Sheila to Kat to Francesca, is it Francesca?
Yeah.
You definitely see that kind of the cycle, and I guess you're maybe seeing, again, with Ellis changing as he gets older and the fact that he's in a relationship with someone who's older still, whether that gives you a different perspective.
Yeah, because I imagine Kirk was partners with Sheila.
Yeah.
So must have been roughly, I think male figure skaters probably get a bit more longevity out of their career, but not...
I mean, I would imagine as in most things, they probably get more longevity from the point of view of, they're not past their prime the way reporters and people talk about them.
Yeah.
But there does come a point where physically they are past their prime.
And I think it is only in, very recent years we're beginning to see athletes who are not retiring at 30 and continuing on, some into their 40s. I mean, I don't know if you follow Formula One, but one of the drivers is like 45 or something.
Well, really,
which is shocking.
In this year's Wimbledon, there was a lot about
Djokovic.
Yeah, and how is he past his prime? Kind of, should he there was a kind of quite a kind of.
Well, he might be past his prime, but he's still
better than 90% of of the population, and the way some of the kind of people talked, like some of the kind of commentators talked about him as if like this old decrepit man should be shuttled off into a home. Why are they letting him out in public? And you're like, he could still absolutely wipe the floor with you.
He could wipe the floor with the world number one if he isn't actually the world number one.
Yeah,
I'm not sure where the rankings are.
I don't watch enough tennis to kind of, as we've said multiple times, I don't sport.
There's not that much gossip in tennis. Like there's not as much as you would think. It more comes from the spectators, I would say.
Interesting.
Maybe on the women's side, there's a bit more. They're a bit more fun, but the men are quite serious and just get married and.
But yeah, it seems like I guess maybe because now there's maybe more ways you can spin a career after it's over, that maybe it blurs more into that. You start competing a little bit less ferociously, but you start bigging up your kind of, I am going to go into commentating, or I am going to go into some kind of sports related career after this, rather than just I will take my money and I will leave and I will never be seen in public again.
Yeah, start getting the brand partnerships. And
like it's just a little bit different now that maybe it's easier to make that segue. There's more space in the kind of commentator, minor celebrity kind of arena for people than there maybe would have been in the past.
Right, I think talking about sports is a good way to wrap up. I want to say thank you, Louise, for selecting this book. You talked a bit in the first episode about why you chose it, and it was a sort of, you thought we would both enjoy it. There's a sporty angle, there's lots of different angles that should reel us both in, to an extent at least. So do you want me to go first with your rating?
Well, I go first because we'll see if I was right.
Okay.
Like, was it what I think? And then you can be like...
Okay.
So my thought on this, as I said, I don't know how I didn't see it was a Wuthering Heights retelling immediately, but that did surprise me. So it was a little bit... Although I'd picked the book, it was a little bit unexpected. Also because I had picked it, from my point of view, purely based on people going, oh my God, it's amazing, it's all about obsession, I love it. And actually, it could have been about lumberjacks, and I wouldn't have known. Like, the ice skating thing, I kind of went, oh, it's about ice skating. That was very, very low on my radar. I did not have much of an idea if the book was about going in. And considering I don't know anything about ice skating, I'm not a fan of books about celebrities. I loved it. I thought it was really good. I loved that mixed media element, the way it gave you the contrast between the two different time periods, and the way it kept that pacing. And I think I've said already, the pacing definitely feeds into that feeling of tension, the atmosphere, the pressure cooker that they would have been feeling under that media scrutiny. Like it all ties together really well. And I think Fargo's done a great job on that. She's done a great job of creating these characters that even the ones you only see in snippets, Francesca, how often do you actually see her pop up? But she's given these you get such a nuance of characters. I've read books where you're following that character the whole book and you don't get the level of complexity that we get in what we see of Sheila. So I thought it was a really, really good book. I don't know that I would rate it 5 stars just because there were elements that they're not my personal taste, like the sports angle and the celebrity angle. They're just not something I'm going to go, oh my God, I loved it. I couldn't point a thing that I thought was bad about the book. I couldn't point something wrong. But again, I'm not super into sports and celebrity, so I'm kind of just like taking what Layne Fargo tells me as gospel at that. So I'd probably come in, I think, about a 4 out of 5.
That's not bad.
It's not bad. It's very, very good.
Yeah. So I think this book for me ticked a lot of boxes. So obviously the kind of sporty side, the gossip side, the mixed media elements, the short chapters. I felt that the kind of breadcrumb clues were well breadcrumbed, if that's one way to put it. So when a point of something happened, I was like, I knew that was going to happen.
I think that's important with these stories. I hate when there's a twist that you could not possibly have seen coming, and it feels more like the author has tricked you. I think when it happens, you should go, oh, I didn't see it, but now it makes sense. It shouldn't just be like a complete 180 for no reason.
We're in the spoiler section. You can see what it is.
No, I just think that in general, I mean, I'm not pointing any fingers at other authors, but ones that go, aha, and you go, but none of that was there. I think to pull off a good twist, in retrospect, if you were rereading the book, you should be able to see it coming.
Yes, I would. They should fall into place. I liked aspects of the ending. I love the fact that they didn't get the gold medal. I just think that worked for me.
It had a nice messy ending.
I don't care that they didn't win the gold medal. I would have been quite happy if they were really raging about it. But I just thought that was a nice moral, I guess, to the story. It was quick and engaging, and I liked the fact that the characters mostly act their age. One thing I would say, and this is a good and a bad, I didn't have a book hangover after it. And which means it's not a 5-star because I need a book hangover for 5-star.
I don't really get book hangovers.
Well, I do. So, and I think that was kind of, for me, the one thing it lacked was I didn't feel that emotionally connected to any of the people in the story, which I guess is a good thing because it felt to me just like gossip, like it would, like with actual real life athletes or whatever. I'm not actually that interested on that level. I like the kind of how humans behave side of it more than I get invested in the emotional side of it.
Yeah, I think I can see that. I can definitely see that. I would say I don't want to say intellectually interested in what was happening to them, but that, I guess, rather than, like you say, I wasn't super emotionally invested in what was happening to them. I wanted to know what happened next, but it was in a slightly more...
It was like the storyline.
I wanted to know rather than, like, the emotional connection being there, which maybe is why I'm not quite... I wouldn't say it would hit a 5-star.
Yeah, and if that emotion had been there, I would have a book hangover, basically. I think as well it comes back to, like, I don't think when the brother died and things, I don't think that was dealt with in a kind of emotional way. Like there was kind of quite a lot of trauma. Heath had trauma. They all had trauma.
That's the tagline of the book. They all had trauma.
They all had trauma, but it didn't feel emotional. And I think something as well that as I was reading, I felt was lacking was there wasn't really, like, their lives changed, they became wealthy, but there wasn't really any kind of discussion around how that happened. There wasn't really, yes, she did one modelling thing, which ended up with chaos happening after. But their change in lifestyle wasn't really acknowledged. It was just like, yes, now we go to glamorous parties and we take private jets wherever we go and the paparazzi follow us, but there wasn't a transition into that. It's like it just happened, and I know that can just happen overnight, but it felt like there was no build up to it at all. And you know what I'm like. I like to talk about money and where money's coming from and how are people affording the things that they're doing. So for me, I really enjoyed it, and it ticked so many boxes for me. And you know, elements of it. It was like, this book has been written for me. I would also say a 4 out of 5. I swithered over whether it would be a 4.5, but I think it's that kind of emotional connection was missing for me, and I do really, to get more than a 4, I do need to be destroyed emotionally in some kind of way.
I think that's what I was saying. I couldn't point to anything it did particularly wrong. That I'm not docking points, but there was just something missing in that emotional connection, maybe, that would just make you obsessed with it.
And you know, I think, like, I get the comps to Taylor Jenkins Reid. I did have book hangovers after Daisy Jones and the Six, after Carrie Soto's Back, after Evelyn Hugo. Not so much after Malibu Rising, but I did have that where it lingered, whereas I could have picked up like a Taylor Jenkins Reid book again. Like, I could have just read one straight after it, whereas normally I need a break.
And we shall, because we have a Taylor Jenkins Reid actually on our little schedule for the upcoming months. But yeah,
it's not next month, is it?
No, we are talking about doing Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid in December.
So what are we doing? Remind me what to read next. Louise reminds me what to do. She keeps me right.
The next book that we will be reading in October is Hungerstone by Kat Dunn. It is a vampire, and this one actually is historical, definitely.
And is it not also a sort of, not quite a retelling in the way that this is a retelling, but is it not like an inspired?
Inspired by, oh goodness, Carmilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu, maybe? But yeah, it's inspired by Camilla, which is essentially the book that inspired Dracula. So there's quite a lot of, there's a nuance of vampire-y, classic-y things going on with Hungerstone. And there's a bit, supposedly, from the blurb, there's a bit of, you know, wildness versus industrialism. Hopefully there's going to be quite a lot of class stuff to talk about in that one.
Well, it sounds very different.
It does. It should be different, hopefully.
So join us next month. We'll do our spoiler-free.
Yes.
And then we will do, 2 weeks later, we'll have our spoiler-full.
Spoiler-full sounds quite fun.
Spoilers.
Yeah, it will be kind of I was going to say unedited, but God, no, it probably won't be.
So we will catch up with you soon. Thanks for listening.